So let's kick off. Hello and welcome to everyone to another one of Zuko's webinars. Today we're going to be looking at optimizing your web forms for accessibility with our special guest, Amrdeep Athwal, who's the Director of Optimization at Conversion Matters, who's obviously been optimizing for a long time. I'll leave him to introduce himself when I hand over. But I'm Alan Lucas. I'm Managing Director of Zuko Analytics. If you've not heard of Zuko, we are a form analytics platform. So been designed to let you know when, where, and why users drop out of your form so you can improve them and ultimately increase your throughput of new customers. Just a little bit of housekeeping. I'm going to keep this fairly informal, so feel free to drop any questions in the Q&A or the chat as we go through, and we'll try and pick up on those at an appropriate time. We'll also make the recording available to all of you, so we'll email you, so you no need to make any too many notes or anything like that. So without further ado, I shall hand over to Amo. There's been a little bit of a technical issue getting him on screen, so you might not be able to see his face, unfortunately, throughout it, but you will be able to hear it. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Amo, to get started.
Thanks a lot, Alan. Glad to be here. So yeah, as Alan said, I'm a optimization analytics consultant. I've been working with data since 2007, been doing optimization since 2012, and the last few years I've had a strong focus on accessibility and general accessibility optimization. So yeah, let me just share my screen and then we can kick off if anyone's not got any questions to start with. Hopefully you can all see my screen. I'm going to take that as a yes.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, brilliant. So yes, here's our talk today. You already know my name. You can follow me on Twitter if you like. I am occasionally active on there. Probably best to follow me on LinkedIn. I'm probably a bit more active on there these days, just because a lot of the stuff I do is for business reasons. So let's get started. I think the main question I always ask myself is why are websites and digital platforms not accessible? I think there's a myriad of different reasons depending on the companies involved, but I think a lot of it comes down to the same thing I see with web analytics is it's usually an afterthought. So therefore, it gets done late in the stage of development, and there's not always a lot of time or resource to change it. So also as well, I think it's just a lack of understanding about some of the challenges people can face when they're trying to access digital content. So one of the big ones is auditory. So this could be someone with partial or complete loss of hearing, but it could also be someone who maybe suffers from tinnitus either regularly or occasionally. I know I get occasional bouts of tinnitus, and so that can make it very difficult to listen to any kind of music, just keep along with any kind of video content a site may use. So then, you know, these things can have a massive effect, but also you've got to remember is every time you're making anything more accessible, you are then also improving the experience for someone who might be in a situation where they are temporarily you know, have these kind of problems. So if someone was on a noisy bus or a building site like my house has become, then you might not be able to hear very well, in which case, you know, you want that. Obviously, a bit less important when it comes to things like forms, but I do know even some forms have a audio capture. So that way, you know, you might have to make allowances for people who might have auditory as well as sight issues if you have a form of capture on your site. Okay, no questions there. I'll spin on. You also find one of the things that gets overlooked quite often is users with cognitive or neurological issues. So they might be neurodivergent, they might have other cognitive issues. So this can change the way that they might think through a form. They might not think exactly how you do. So when you're looking at forms, when you're looking at wider web digital content, you've got to take a view that people with cognitive or neurological differences might find that they are approaching things very differently. So therefore, the standard pattern, the standard, golden path may not work. So you need to be able to have a clear way of signposting that there is this preferred route, or you make allowances for the fact that some users might fill in things in different orders, and that's fine. I think Craig Sullivan gave a great talk on experimentation elite a few weeks ago, and one of his big hates was premature validation warnings. For someone with cognitive issues, or who's neurodivergent, being constantly told they got something wrong before they've even started typing out can be a major hindrance. So yeah, it definitely plays a part in terms of how it affects the standard user experience, but also the user experience for anyone with any kind of cognitive issues or who is neurodivergent. Any questions on that before I spin on? Great.
I mean, I don't have any questions, Amo, so, but I just think it's an interesting one, that piece, because it's one that I personally don't necessarily always think of when I think about accessibility. You kind of think of the visuals and the audio and that sort of thing, but yeah, physical stuff. But actually, it makes a really good point that actually makes it even more important that you get your error messaging right for this, because I hadn't considered that at all before.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I recently had a site that I was approaching, and then one of the validation messages was, you must use, a special character, you must use a number, must use capitals, must use lowercase. And I was like, great. I went off and I tried to create a password, and I was so frustrated because it took me like 10 minutes to try to create a password. And eventually I figured out, oh, they don't consider, I'm going to make up a special character here because I don't want to know my password. They don't consider the $ a special character. And I was like, but all the others I tried work. So I was like, why is the $? If you've got an exception, show me what the exception is. Because I will just keep trying variations with the same with the same special character, because to me that's the special character I always use, or one of them. So yeah, this it definitely can make massive hindrances, and I think any of these things is what I really want to stress, is any of these things you make for anyone with accessibility issues, any changes, any allowances, they're going to work for the whole population, right? It could be just be someone being obtuse like I was. I want to use this, I'm going to use this, you're not going to stop me. But eventually they did stop me. So yeah, it's definitely it's something you got to pay a lot of attention to and think about, because I think probably the brain is probably the most powerful organ in the body, and if you ignore it, then you're going to be up a one-way street.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Let's spin on. So yeah, as you pointed out, we're probably most familiar with physical accessibility issues, and obviously these are doubly important on the web, especially on mobile, where you have the smaller screen sizes, there's less areas, and sometimes it can be a combination of issues. Like my father, he's in his 60s, and when he is looking at something on his phone, he has to hold it at arm's length. And I don't know if you've ever tried using a phone at arm's length. It's really difficult to click a call to action. So if your call to actions are too close to each other, if your form fields are too close to each other, these can cause big issues. But a word of warning, this, with any of this advice, it needs to be tested. I once run a test on a form where I was like, it was marketed at an older audience, over 50s, I think. And so I had to, think about it. I thought about the accessibility, and I thought, oh yeah, I've got a great idea. On mobile, I'm going to just increase the spacing slightly between the form fields, just to make it more accessible. And the same number of fields, etc., etc. It made the form slightly longer, but like I said, there's nothing more to fill out. But actually, we saw form conversions drop by about 15%, and I was like, what the hell is going on here? And it wasn't until I noticed, I was like, oh, there's a lot of users who will just scroll down all the way to the bottom of the form, scroll up to see how much information they're asking, how long they think it's going to take, etc., etc. So even though I had not increased any more fields or information or complexity, it just was perceived as being longer, so therefore more users were dropping out. I found the solution I found was to split it over 2 steps rather than one. Um, like I said, exactly the stills, exactly the same process. Actually, maybe takes slightly longer because you've got a refresh, but that then saw the increases in conversion rate I was hoping to see. So yeah, it's a tough nut to crack. But there are ways around it, and you basically sometimes it's going to be trial and error. Sometimes if you can bake it in from inception, even better. But like I said, most times I find it gets left to maybe later in the stage. Next is users might have problems with their speech. So, if you're using things like text to speech, which sometimes users do when they're using things like web chats or anything like that, this can cause issues. Also as well, there are some accessibility devices where if users cannot type, they can talk and they can fill in forms and etc. For users, but be aware that obviously speech recognition is still, I wouldn't say iffy, but it's still not perfect. So you've got to allow for your forms to be able to capture imperfect information, but also validate that that is what the user meant. So which is why, at GovUK, you always be shown a page at the end of filling in all the forms to say, this is the information you entered, is it correct? Just to get that final bit of validation. But obviously, you're not going to see that in every industry, but obviously with WK and financial services and medical, the information it has to be right. So therefore, maybe a summary screen at the end is a good way to approach this. And then we get to visual. So one of the biggest issues I see is users with using screen readers that are not able to use the site properly because no one's thought about the layout. So a good example of this would be on a form where you've got the form field label to the side of the input field or below the input field, which is, I don't know why people do that, but some people do. I always think, and I think the research done by the government has backed this up, that above the form field works. I think Craig Sullivan has also said the same thing as well in various talks, because it allows people to be told, this is what I need to enter, and then it moves them to where they need to enter it. So just thinking about that from an accessibility point of view shows that, yeah, it's good for the user in general, but also good for accessibility reasons as well. And also as well, another tip is on forms always to try to have a heading on a form that tells you what the form is for. So if a user is going through the site and they have visual issues, maybe they're not seeing the whole rest of the page, maybe they've gone straight to the form, they know, right, this is the form to enter my details for a credit check or whatever it might be, if you have multiple forms on multiple pages. So like I said, really important for people with those kind of visual issues. Also as well, something that I always have an issue with is contrasting colors. Please make sure your your form text is legible against the background you've chosen, because even if you don't have any kind of accessibility issues, you're outside on a sunny day, makes it damn difficult to read or almost impossible. So like I said, this is a point I want to reiterate as I go through, is that you might be improving something for accessibility, but then actually you're improving it for anybody who's trying to access your content, regardless of how they're trying to access it. So that's just a key point I want to keep hammering home today. Okay. So now we'll get to how many people does this affect? So I was actually shocked when I did some research and tried to find out some figures on how many people have more of the straightforward accessibility issues. So disability affects about 15 to 20% of the world. It slightly differs depending on which piece of research and how you define disability, which is why I put this range in there. But yeah, roughly from about 1 in 7 to about 1 in 5 people. So it's a significant segment of any online experience, any forms, etc. So this is why it's so important to make sure you cater for it and make sure you have optimized as well as you can. So about 1 in 6 people have hearing loss. And I think this is really important for general web experience, probably less so for forms. 30% of people with disabilities have dexterity issues. This is really, really key when it comes to forms. Like I mentioned earlier, one of the big things I noticed is form fields that are way too close on mobile. and in-app, less so on web. But even on web, someone might have dexterity issues. They can't click with the mouse as well as someone else might do. I mean, at the moment, I've got a cut on one of my fingers, which makes it very hard for me to point and click with the mouse. So I end up using the trackpad, which is not as accurate. So, I'm even in the same boat as at this moment. So like I said, the same point I want to reiterate is when you make things accessible for some, make them accessible for all. So 5 million people struggle with reading in the UK. I was shocked about this. I didn't realize it was this high. But yeah, if people can't comprehend what you're trying to say, it makes it much harder for them to figure out the information they need to provide you. So 2 million people in the UK suffer with complete sight loss. So yeah, it's another huge segment that I wasn't aware of. A lot of these people will be using things like screen readers, which basically read out what content is on a page or form and read it back to users. So you have to have your content structured nicely, otherwise they won't know what's there. So you need to have the right things in H2, H1s. You need to make sure things are tagged up correctly so they have alt attributes as well. So why should you care apart from the obvious being a decent human being? So the purple pound, so those are people with accessibility or disability issues, that's worth about 249 billion a year in the UK. So a significant amount of money is out there, which I personally feel is being undervalued, underutilized, under-optimized for. And also as well, I don't have it in this slide, but some of the research shows that people who find a site that meets the accessibility issues or meets the accessibility needs are much more likely to keep using the same site. So it's a way of increasing that customer lifetime value, increasing that brand loyalty that we so often hear about. So 1 in 4 of all disabled adults have never been online. So you're very possibly your service, your product, your form, whatever might be the very first experience this person has with the web. So this is why you need to make things as clear, as concise, and as easy as possible, because not only that might they have some accessibility issues, but it must also be very well their very first time encountering the web, in which case then, it makes it doubly hard. So 70% of UK websites are inaccessible. I was shocked it was this high, saddened. I think we can all do better. And I think, the more we can talk about these kind of things, the more we'll kind of see this change going forward. So a 2020 WebIAM research report found that of the top 98%, it's found that 98% of the top 1 million websites homepages had detectable WCAG failures. So the WCAG are basically the ones who make the accessibility guidelines. I believe it's 2.1 or 2.2 now, the latest version. But yeah, if you Google that, you can find out what the guidelines are, and they will help you to figure out how you can improve a site based upon their guidelines. But yeah, 98% is shocking. I think if they were to look at forms, it'd be just as high as well. So in the US, you have what's called the Americans with Disability Act. Now, if you do any kind of selling or any kind of business over in the US with your site, then you fall under this act, and therefore you have to make sure legally your site is accessible. If you don't, you will get a lawsuit. A company I worked for had been sued twice in the last 2 years, lost both times because they had accessibility issues. I believe it was they weren't catering for people who are colorblind based on the colors of the site. So if for no other reason you don't want to get sued, and who wants to get sued, it's a really important reason why to do it. Lawsuits are increasing year on year in the States. I think it's increasing about 400% a year. There was a slight dip due to coronavirus, but yeah, I think the figures for 2022 are going to be the highest they've ever been by a long shot. So yeah, definitely important one. The fines can be massively large. I believe it was Netflix that had a $200 million fine. So there's quite a hit that can be imposed, especially if you're a large international organization. Questions? Do we have any questions for me today?
Well, I mean, I have a number because there's a lot of things I kind of learned there that I didn't know. I obviously piped up when we talked about cognitive disabilities, but there's a lot of other things. So I'll kind of I'll ask a couple of questions and leave time
Sure.
for everyone else to drop some additional questions in.
Yeah.
I'm kind of just interested in yourself as well. First, I mean, how did you first get interested in accessibility issues? Was there a particular trigger?
Well, but obviously you can't see on today because I've not got my camera on, but I have got I've always had bad eyesight. I have basically one good eye and one bad eye that gets me about 80% vision of that eye. So
Yeah,
my binocular vision is not great. So I will sometimes quite easily miss things on a page if they're not really obvious. So which is why I say for me things like the text on the colored backgrounds or colored images is a
yeah,
big issue. And so, but also I worked for a company or did some work for a company that
mm,
sold hearing devices as well as other accessibility things. So yeah, all the customers of the site had some form of accessibility issue. Apart from there was some customers buying it for their elderly relatives or friends or whatever. But yeah, the main customer base was people with accessibility issues. So yeah, everything we had to build or test had to be looked at through the lenses. Is this going to meet people's needs if they are using the site with a screen reader or a screen magnifier or it can be as simple as I find one thing that really causes me issues is I have to look at most sites zoomed in 125%. You do that, a lot of sites will break. Call to actions will disappear off the page where you can't click on them. So I've got to is constantly be zooming in and out just so I can access relevant content, which is annoying. And it forms are probably the biggest biggest issues because a certain new trend is where forms are appearing in pop-ups, but if you zoomed in, the end of the form might be just being outside the pop-up,
yeah,
and you can't resize the pop-up because a lot of the times you can't. So you're constantly zooming in and out and to try to access the content and double checking, have I written that right? No, I haven't.
yeah,
Start again, etc.
yeah.
So yeah, it's probably those two main reasons.
Cool. There's a question from Craig, also on my list, is about tools. I mean, are there any tools you recommend to improve
Yeah.
accessibility? Craig's shared a few in the comments, but yeah.
Yeah, so I've got a few wave checkers. One I use in this deck. I'll be sharing this deck out after this talk, so
Mm,
you can take a look through there. There's some good automated tools that will look for things like images lacking alt text, and etc. and things like that. But I think to do it really well, some of the companies I've worked at have taken it to specialist accessibility companies and will actually put it in the hands of users with accessibility issues,
mhm.
and they can go through and do an audit to say, these are some of the issues that we're having while trying out the site or the form or whatever it
Yeah.
might be.
Yeah, and also, I mean, this is anecdotal, so yeah, but having number of blind friends, actually, they're actually, I know you said 1 in 4 don't people with disability don't necessarily access the web, but often what I find is those that do are very savvy, so they will be very good at telling you what's wrong and even suggesting
Yeah,
improvements, because that's all they do all day is they interact with the web, and they know when there's an issue as well.
yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Then there's a question from a man about how to convince management to work on accessibility of internal apps. So I
Internal
guess
apps, as in apps for the business itself.
that's what I'm assuming. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. I can't say I work with too many apps for the business, but you should be able to, I would say, speak to HR and get them
Yeah.
involved and get them to say, look, this is not meeting uh, our, our employees' needs. We need to make sure it's accessible for all employees. There's various employment laws that say the exact same thing. So if you have got things like internal apps, intranets, etc., that are not accessible, then that could be grounds for an employee to take you to an employee tribunal in the UK, or take you to court in the US under the ADA legislation. So that would be probably the approach I would try to use. Say, look, this is a requirement, absolutely. Otherwise, we're opening ourselves up. But also, from just like I said, in the general point of view, it's the right thing to be doing. It's best for your employees. You don't want a bunch of pissed off employees talking about how they can't access their pay slips because you've not made it accessible.
Yeah, that makes sense. Question for me this time in terms of, are there any data sources that are useful when you're looking at accessibility?
Yeah, there are. They tend to be, I wouldn't say you can't have the greatest inference, but you can just try and detect things. So quite often what I find is, one of the tests I tend to run a lot is to detect accessibility issues is increasing the font size. I think I started at one company where the font size was, 12 pixels. And every time I increased it, the conversion rates went up. I was like, great, amazing. I found the magic bullet of conversion rate. All I got to do is keep increasing font sizes, but it tends to level out around 16 pixels. I think this is also something that Craig said during his talk. Also as well, if you try to increase it too far, it tends to break things. So 16 pixels is one way to do that. So trial and error is definitely one way I found. Like I said, when I ran the test on increasing the spacing between form fields, that helped me detect that audience. But yeah, I think you can have a look at things like how long does it take users to fill out certain form sections. That's really useful because if they do have dexterity issues, they're going to end up taking longer.
Yeah.
I remember where I had a web chat form and it was timing out after, I think it was like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it was. And then we had some feedback from our customers to say that, I have accessibility issues, I've got arthritis, it takes me 20 minutes to write a question, and your form keeps typing out before I'm finished typing out my question. So that's another great source of feedback, is to have these kind of feedback widgets as well and gather that data to find out how many users are experiencing issues. Short of that, is really hard to detect with the data. I've tried looking at it 1,000 different ways, trying to detect things like screen readers and screen magnifiers, but a lot of the time, you just can't see them in the data. But you can see what the effects are. So if you do see a lot of timeouts, if you do see a lot of users abandoning forms at certain sections, then you can kind of make an inference and then try and run an experiment to try to either prove or disprove that hypothesis.
Okay, makes sense. And what do you think is the hardest thing to get right about accessibility, in your experience?
I think the hardest thing is catering for all needs. So I'll give you this, this presentation. I've tried to make this presentation accessible. It's white on black. I've capitalized the first letter, etc., kept the amount of information per slide fairly small, just so that, I'm not trying to do that. But someone pointed out to me that, if you've got certain forms of neurodivergency, black, white text on black is actually not very good for them. So I'm like, unfortunately, I personally suffer from a vestibular disorder, so I don't like really bright screens with black text on them. So since I'm the one who's going to be looking at the slides 90% of the time, I have to cater for me first and try and cater for everyone else. I think, the biggest is, where do you make that compromise? And I think you have to take it from a percentages point of view. So if you know your audience of your site has much more people with hearing difficulties, then you need to cater more towards the hearing side than anything else.
Cool. Okay. Well, I've got one more question, unless anyone else wants to jump in with any other questions that they may have. I don't think there's any that have come in, but there might be. But in terms of my final question, is if you had one, actually, have we got one? Yeah. Well, Craig's asking, are there any other tools at all? I know you mentioned some, and I know we will share slides with any on there. Okay, we'll do that unless there's anything else you want to mention.
In terms of the tool things, it's something that Craig's mentioned before, is if you have a look at the Gov UK stuff, they are probably the most accessible forms out there, because they have to be. It's a legal requirement. They have to make the forms accessible to the whole population. They run massive amounts of user testing on every single service multiple times, every time something changes. They're probably the most user tested and accessible forms in the world. So if you're looking for tips and tricks and templates, they're probably one of the best sources out there. So yeah, copy from the best, and you usually can't go for too wrong.
Okay. Cool. Well, final question then. So if you could, for our audience today, if there's one key takeaway you'd want them to take away about accessibility, what would that be?
So I think it's a point I've tried to hammer through, that if you make things accessible for some, they're accessible for all. So, like I said, you might not have any sight issues, but if you're outside on a sunny day on your phone, then yeah, you suddenly do have a sight issue. You can't see what's on your screen. So, if you're on a noisy bus, you can't hear very well what's going on around you. You're not gonna be able to see a video. So yes, you are gonna need transcription or subtitles or something like that. So yeah, when you improve these things for this 15-20%, you're not just improving it for the 15-20%, you're improving it for anyone who might use it in a different situation. You might not have dexterity issues, but if you're walking down the street trying to do something while you're getting to the bus stop, then yeah, you suddenly do, because you're moving and it's harder to hit a moving target. So yeah, massively these things can improve the whole user experience, but especially for the subset that have these issues day in, day out. And I think anything we can do to make their lives a little bit easier is definitely worth doing.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much today. It's been really enlightening. As I say, there's some things that I hadn't considered before that are now on my radar. If anyone wants to ask any follow-up questions to Amo, he's available on LinkedIn. You can get hold of him there. And
LinkedIn, Slack, Twitter, yeah, I'm all over the shop. You should be able to find me.
Great. And we'll also share everything from today. So you should be getting an email with everything on. It'll be hosted on the Zuko website, and social media. We'll put it out there. So you should be able to access that if you want to review it at all, along with the slides. So thank you very much, Amo, today. We'll wind that up. And thank you very much, all.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Alan. Good to be here.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.